This is just too beautiful to ignore. Not because the ball carried 127 meters into the left field seats. Not because the stadium in Los Angeles erupted twice in the span of 4 innings. But because of what those 2 home runs meant to a man who had been carrying the weight of 19 silent games on his shoulders. Mookie Betts had not hit a home run in 19 games. 19. For a player of his caliber, that number doesn't just represent days on a calendar. It represents questions. It represents whispers in dugouts, uncomfortable silences after press conferences, and the kind of internal pressure that doesn't show up in any box score. When a player like Mookie Betts goes cold, the world notices. When a player like Mookie Betts goes cold for 19 straight games, the world starts asking uncomfortable questions. But last night, the questions stopped. Because Mookie Betts didn't just end the drought. He ended it twice. Back-to-back home runs. The kind of night that doesn't just fill a highlight reel. The kind of night that changes a conversation. And somewhere behind that conversation, behind those 2 swings, behind those 19 games of silence, was a story that most people in that stadium had no idea about. It started with a man named Professor Yada. And it started with something called Seiza. The first home run came in the 3rd inning. The Dodgers were trailing by 1. The atmosphere inside Dodger Stadium was tense but not panicked. This was May, not October. But there was still something heavy in the air. Something that had been building for 19 games. The kind of weight that doesn't disappear just because the calendar changes. Mookie Betts stepped into the batter's box. He looked calm. Almost eerily calm. His batting gloves were adjusted slowly. His helmet was tapped once. His eyes fixed on the pitcher with the kind of focus that doesn't come from a pre-game pep talk. It comes from something deeper. Something practiced in silence, far away from the bright lights and the roaring crowd. The first pitch came in at 154 kilometers per hour. Mookie didn't flinch. He waited. And then he didn't wait anymore. The bat connected with a sound that silenced the stadium for exactly 1 second before it erupted. The ball left the park at 178.4 kilometers per hour. It carried 127 meters. It landed in the left field seats before most people had even processed what they had witnessed. The drought was over. But Mookie Betts didn't celebrate like a man who had just been rescued. He rounded the bases with a quiet, controlled intensity. 1 fist pump. 1 nod to the dugout. As if he had always known this moment was coming. As if 19 games of silence had simply been preparation for this exact moment. The dugout reacted the way dugouts react when something shifts. Not just excitement. Relief. The kind of release that only comes after a long, prolonged tension. His teammates rose from the bench. Some of them shouted. Some of them simply watched him round third base with wide eyes. Dave Roberts stood at the edge of the dugout. He didn't shout. He didn't pump his fist. He simply watched. And the slight smile that crossed his face said more than any celebration could have communicated. Because Roberts had seen something in Mookie over the last few weeks that the cameras couldn't capture. He had seen a man fighting privately with something that public statistics could never fully explain. The drought wasn't just about mechanics. It wasn't just about timing or pitch recognition or launch angle. It was about something else entirely. 4 innings later, Mookie Betts did it again. Same bat. Same quiet intensity. Different pitcher. Same result. The second home run was if anything more emphatic than the first. It came on a 2-1 count. The pitcher had tried to go away with a slider. Mookie had seen it early. His hips rotated before most hitters would have committed. The ball left the bat at an angle that immediately told everyone in the stadium what was about to happen. It disappeared into the night sky over right center field. 134 meters. This time, the dugout didn't just react. It exploded. And this time, Mookie Betts allowed himself a moment. A real moment. He stood at home plate for exactly 2 seconds longer than necessary. Not for showmanship. Not for drama. But because 19 games of internal struggle deserved at least 2 seconds of acknowledgement before the next chapter began. Back-to-back home runs. One night. And behind it all, a secret that was about to become the most talked-about story in baseball. Professor Yada had not been in the Dodgers clubhouse by accident. His presence in Los Angeles had been quiet. Deliberate. The kind of arrangement that organizations make when they are looking for answers in places that conventional baseball wisdom doesn't always consider. Professor Yada is not a hitting coach. He is not a sports psychologist in the traditional sense. He is something rarer and harder to categorize. He is a master of Seiza. For those unfamiliar with the word, Seiza is a traditional Japanese sitting posture. Knees on the ground. Body perfectly upright. Weight distributed precisely. It is a position practiced for centuries in Japan as a form of meditation, discipline, and mental clarity. It is used in martial arts, in tea ceremonies, in moments of deep spiritual reflection. It is not, by conventional wisdom, something that belongs in a Major League Baseball clubhouse. But Professor Yada had a different perspective. And Mookie Betts had been listening. The sessions began 3 weeks ago. Far from the cameras. Far from the pre-game routines that the public sees. In a quiet room beneath the stadium, with no audience and no fanfare, Mookie Betts sat in Seiza with Professor Yada and began to understand something about himself that 19 games of struggling had forced him to confront. The problem wasn't his swing. The Dodgers analytics team had confirmed that. His mechanics hadn't changed significantly. His bat speed remained elite. His contact rate, while slightly lower than his peak, was still well above league average. The numbers told a story of a player in a slump, yes, but not a player who had fundamentally broken down. The problem was somewhere else. Professor Yada identified it in their first session together. He watched Mookie sit. He watched how his body held tension. He watched where the tightness lived. And then he said something that stopped Mookie completely. He said, "You are carrying the last at-bat into every new one." That sentence sounds simple. Every hitting coach in baseball has said some version of it. Forget the last one. Stay in the present. Move forward. These are phrases that live on motivational posters and pre-game speeches. But Professor Yada wasn't talking about psychology. He was talking about the body. Seiza, as Professor Yada explained it, is not simply about sitting still. It is about training the body to release. The traditional posture forces the lower back into alignment. It quiets the nervous system. It teaches the practitioner to feel where tension is being stored and then, through breath and stillness, to let it go. For a hitter in a slump, this is not a small thing. Because slumps are not always mental. Sometimes they are physical memories. The body remembers every strikeout. Every weak ground ball. Every swing that felt wrong. And over 19 games, those physical memories can accumulate in ways that no amount of batting practice can dissolve. Professor Yada's Seiza sessions were not meditation in the casual, modern sense. They were surgery. Quiet, precise, invisible surgery on the part of Mookie Betts that the cameras had never been able to see. After the game, the press conference room had a different energy than usual. Mookie Betts sat in front of the microphones looking like a man who had just set down something heavy. Not exhausted. Lighter. The way a person looks when something that had been pressing against them for weeks has finally been removed. A reporter asked the obvious question first. 19 games. 2 home runs tonight. What changed? Mookie paused. Not the pause of someone searching for the right answer. The pause of someone deciding how much of the right answer they wanted to share. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him. He exhaled slowly. And then he smiled. Not a performative smile for the cameras. A real one. The kind that arrives without permission. "I learned how to sit down," he said. The room went quiet for exactly 1 moment before the confusion set in. Reporters exchanged glances. A few laughed nervously, assuming it was deflection. Assuming it was the kind of vague athlete speak that fills press conferences without actually saying anything. But Mookie wasn't deflecting. He meant it literally. He explained it carefully. Without naming Professor Yada directly at first. Without going into details that felt too private to share under fluorescent lights with 17 cameras pointed at his face. But he said enough. He talked about tension. About how 19 games had taught him something about where he was holding stress in his body that he hadn't known before. About how a different kind of practice, something quieter and older than anything he had encountered in professional baseball, had helped him find something that hitting coaches and analytics and extra batting practice had not been able to locate. A reporter toward the back of the room raised a hand. "Are you talking about Seiza?" Mookie looked at the reporter for a moment. He nodded once. The room erupted in a way that press conference rooms rarely erupt. Not with chaos. With the specific energy of a story that everyone in the room suddenly understood was bigger than tonight's box score. Because Seiza is not a word that belongs in a Major League Baseball press conference. And yet here it was. And here was Mookie Betts, 2 home runs richer, 19-game drought officially buried, sitting in front of the world and giving credit not to a new batting stance or a mechanical adjustment or a conversation with Dave Roberts, but to an ancient Japanese sitting posture. And to a professor that almost nobody in that room had heard of until tonight. Dave Roberts spoke afterward. His voice was measured but warm. The voice of a manager who had taken a quiet risk and watched it pay off in the most public way imaginable. He was asked whether the Seiza sessions had been his idea. He paused. "It was a collaborative decision," he said carefully. "We were looking for something that could help Mookie find what we all knew was still there. Sometimes the answer isn't in the film room. Sometimes it's somewhere quieter than that." A reporter pressed further. "Was there resistance in the organization to bringing in someone like Professor Yada?" Roberts allowed himself a small smile. "There's always resistance to anything new," he said. "But results have a way of making conversations easier." The results tonight were not subtle. 2 home runs. 4 runs batted in. A Dodgers victory that felt like more than a victory. It felt like a reset. Like the beginning of something. Like the moment a player who had been searching finally stopped searching and simply found. Mookie Betts left the stadium that night without speaking to any additional reporters. He had said what he needed to say. He had done what he needed to do. Somewhere, in a quiet room beneath a Major League Baseball stadium, a man named Professor Yada had watched the game. He had not celebrated loudly. He had not needed to. Because what happened tonight on that field was never really about home runs. It was about a player learning how to sit still long enough to remember who he was. And when Mookie Betts remembered, the baseball had no choice but to go where it always goes when a player is truly present. Over the fence. Twice.